Welcome back to the IoT podcast. I'm your host, Tom White. Every week, we are joined by the biggest names in IoT to unravel the trends, misconceptions, and predictions for the Internet of Things. Before we get into today's episode, don't forget to subscribe on whichever platform you're watching or listening on, and turn on that notification bell so you're never out of the loop. Today's episode, I'm joined by none other than Dipti Vachani, SVP and General Manager of Automotive at Arm. We'll be expanding on the shift to software-defined vehicles, their impact on safety and security, and the role of the SOAFEE project in accelerating and development of testing connected vehicle applications. Before we get into the episode, shout out to one of our sponsors today, 5E Tech. 5E Tech are specialists in finding people who make technology a force for good in the world. They bridge the gap between talent and deep tech businesses around the globe. Click the link in the description to find out more. Before we get into the episode, shout out to one of our sponsors, IoT Tech Expo Europe, the leading event for digital twins, IoT and digital transformation. Dipti, welcome to the IoT podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. As I was saying backstage, really genuinely excited for this. And I'm not just saying that. I think it's easy. I think it's easy to get into podcasts and say that on every single episode. But genuinely am.
This time it was just me.
Just you. It's all for you. It's
all
for you. Yeah, absolutely. But really interested for the folks to hear about your background, what you're doing at Arm, specifically around automotive, and we're going to cover a range of topics today. But for everyone that's viewing and listening, or however they're consuming this podcast today, could you give us an introduction to who you are?
Who I am. I've been in the industry, I don't want to say how many years because I'll be aging myself at that point. But my background includes about 17 years at Texas Instruments and some time at Intel most recently, and now at Arm. And I run the automotive business at Arm. When I first started, automotive and IoT were together. We had a combined business as we were starting to nurture that IoT business as well as nurturing the automotive business. But both of those businesses have become quite significant for the company and a significant investment as well as a future. And so now I'm taking the automotive on as to what the next direction is with software-defined vehicles, electrification, all the amazing things that's happening in that industry.
Excellent.
And at the end of the day, it's just a big thing in the middle of IoT. So
yeah, absolutely. I think that's the real key part here, right? Yeah, IoT being a concept and connecting various industries and ecosystems together. Mm-hmm. And automotive is one that really interests me personally. I'm a big car nut. I've always had been, right? So anything to do with the automotive industry, naturally I lean to. But we had an episode actually a few months back with a friend of mine who was at AWS talking about software-defined vehicles. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, that would be really interesting to get into, actually, just to understand a little bit about where we're all going. I think certainly...
Pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? It's, you know, from what was that kind of mechanical internal combustion engine, very messy, actually.
Kind of stoic, doesn't change, hunk of metal, but pretty cool hunk of metal, but basically that. Now it's a connected device, and kind of the same experience you have from your mobile phone, right?
Yes, yeah.
From
absolutely.
A software experience standpoint.
So on that note then, so for people to understand that might not understand software-defined vehicles, what, you know, you've just labeled it there. So it is a mobile phone, effectively, right? The car or an automotive vehicle is turning into that. Is that how you would best describe it?
Yeah, and you know, often software-defined vehicles get synonymous with autonomous, right? So we think, okay, the autonomous vehicles is software-defined, but honestly, it is much more and everything beyond that. So think about just back in the day. I was just remembering this. I had a car which had a map in it, and that was really cool back then when we had a map in our car, right? And I had to go buy new CDs. I'm really aging myself to update that map. right? I had to go get a new
Yeah,
CD from the
I remember.
dealership. I mean, remember the pain
The
that
P-
is? And then,
the PNDs, right? Personal
yeah,
navigation devices.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then you had to update. So now that's just done dynamically.
Mm.
And that in itself is software defined. It is defined by software. It can be updated by software. It's on the air updates, on the go updates. And so it is so holistically changing the experience in the car beyond, in addition to all the kind of autonomous functions that we're starting to see in the car, a nice user experience we're starting to see in the car, as well as the electrification. All of those things are kind of happening, but software defined is pervasive across all of
That's a really nice way to explain it, and I think clears things up for people that automatically assume SWD is actually autonomous driving,
that.
which is a component, right? And as you say, it's pervasive
Component,
across
right.
all the
And often
aspects.
those get mixed, right? Like they think
Mm.
autonomous has everything to do with electrification. Well, no, not really. Those are actually separate too. It's just all happening at the same time that it's easy to put them all in one bucket, but those fundamental technologies are happening in parallel.
Yeah. Why do you think there is this coalition of growing advancements at the moment, certainly within automotive, and it's all happening at the same time? Is it because the tech wasn't as robust before to be able to do both the software defined and the autonomous driving, the electrification? Is that your view on it?
It's a very interesting, and again, this is it almost feels like the perfect storm, right? If you think about it, there's multiple components coming in. One is the electric battery technology is ready, and our awareness of green technologies and our sensitivity to that, right, and the next generation sensitivity to that. So that's happening, and from a social construct as well as a technology construct. And then in addition, we've figured out that we can put this technology in a car with lots of software to create a safer environment. So now more autonomous functions are capable, lane change, whether it's that or crash detection. All of those technologies are becoming more mature, and we're ready to deploy them in a real situation. And so there's maturity of that technology and also an acceptance of that technology. Um, it's you'd have to interview people to see who would be comfortable getting in an autonomous car, right? That's a pretty interesting conversation we've had at over a dinner table. There'll be half the crowd will say, no, I would never get in a car that would just drive itself. I don't trust it. And so there's a trust element that's still, we're still navigating through that, but that's starting to happen. So that's the autonomous side of things. Technology is ready, and social acceptance of that as well. And then the software defined element, it's the cloud functionality or cloud technologies like hypervisors and the kind of software capabilities, AI capabilities, or perception technologies or learning technologies that are done in the cloud are maturing as well, which allow for that really nice update cycles that we can have between the data center and the cloud. So those technologies maturing as well, the data center technologies, and now are comfortable. Now we're more comfortable having that in a vehicle, those kind of technologies. And so it's not one thing. I guess that's the point, right? It's often we want to look for one answer, but it's multiple elements happening all at the same time, and that perfect storm of those elements coming together to mature the environment that we have in the car now.
Yeah, yeah. It really is, remarkable, isn't it, that everything comes together at the same time?
Yeah, it
And
does.
that point that you made around the trust, I think, is a really big one, actually, isn't it? Because I think for years that's plagued the industry. Certainly from self-driving, there's certain levels of self-driving. I think level 4 and 5, like the higher levels. Do people actually trust that? And I think that's a continual, ongoing debate, and something that's going to have to change as times change.
Right.
But in terms of the benefits then for consumers and businesses, what are the tangible benefits of a software-defined vehicle?
Oh wow, it's there. There's just one of those. I'll get to probably the one that we experience most when I get a new software on my update on my car. It's like Christmas morning, right? I get in there and I'm like, wow, what happened? Like, what's going to happen? Like, I got all these new functionalities. And so there's just that experience of getting a new thing. It feels like a new thing when you get a new software update. Beyond that, though, what's happening is more safety functionality is being deployed, more security is being deployed. So as we learn of gaps in our security technology in the car, we're deploying updates. And so our security is getting more robust. It's not a stagnant unit. As we learn, we improve, right? We're learning also from big data, meaning we've taken data across multiple vehicles, and from that learn how to improve the safety of that car. And that learning then gets deployed to that individual car, which is a really neat way to continue to improve our experience and our safety in the car. And so it's you see the updates and you see the new functionality. That's what we experience. But there's a lot of other stuff that's happening behind the scenes that just makes that car more safe, more secure, and from all intents and purposes, just more robust, right? And it's scalable over time. It doesn't become stagnant. The features of the car, most of us have more functionality in the car than we actually take advantage of, and over time, that functionality gets deployed as we get more software updates.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the major things, isn't it? So sometimes you often see in the media, you get a bit of bad press actually when you see things like microtransactions and having to pay for various elements of the car. But ultimately, the safety and the harnessing of thousands, if not millions, of vehicles on the road and then being able to deploy that straight away, I think is really quite special. And
it is very special, and in the end, that is benefiting the consumer, and the consumer is getting the benefit of all of those the value that's coming from that software, from those software updates. And that's how, and the way ARM looks at it is we have the assets in the data center, we have assets in the car, and they're very similar but different. Yes. We have to think about the real-time nature and the safety elements of the car that are fundamentally different than anything else that's out there.
Yes.
Right? And as we take into account the safety, the real-time nature, we then put that kind of knowing and that knowledge in our data center assets as well, so that there's a cohesiveness between those two deployment units, right? So what's happening in the cloud and how it's deployed in the thing is done holistically and viewed as from the safety and the real-time concerns of the car, right? That we're not looking at it just another thing. It is a thing, but it has very, very important and assets that need to be considered when we're deploying software.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've touched upon that just a little bit there, Dipti, about ARM's role in all of this. Right. And that would be really interesting to get into now. So ARM are heavily involved in this area, and for good reason, right?
We've been in the automotive space for over 20 years, right? And that's important. That's important because longevity, experience, investment in the space, and the learning that comes from that is so important for this industry, because, as you know, the dynamics of a car and the longevity of what a vehicle is in the market for. And so there's that longevity, but we've also been investing in safety for over 20 years as well. Those safety technologies are very unique and very important to hitting the criteria for putting a human being in a vehicle, right? And so our safety investments. And so for a while, we've been deploying AE technologies, and that is automotive enhanced. That is technologies and IP that are ASLB and ASLD ready. That is that we've done all the work to ensure that you can get to ASLB and ASLD standards. And for those that are not in the automotive industry, those are standards that ensure there's a safety, that we understand what the safety and the testability of the vehicle is, right? Or the technology is. And so that's one area where we're investing. But beyond that, what we'd like to see is these safety technologies scale. And to scale, and this is where ARM adds its most value, right? We know how to scale technologies. And so one of the investments we've been making is our investment in SOAFEE. because one of what we see is that this vast amount of software that's being deployed into a car. The hardware can be there, but the long pole in tent now is the software investment. So just getting all of that software and then being able to reuse that software across multiple hardware technologies is critical to the OEMs. And so we've created a standard called SOAFEE. It's an open standard, and in that governing body, we allow for reuse of software across multiple hardware. We also create a technology that is synonymous with what's in the cloud. So it's built on the system-ready technologies that we already have in the cloud. So this is what I was referring to earlier, that we have technology in the cloud, but now we have an understanding of the safety and the real-time nature of the vehicle itself. And between those two standards, we're able to cohesively look at this from cloud to edge. And then the other element of what we've enabled in SOAFEE is allowed to shift left to software development, because we recognize that software is delaying the vehicle deployment. And so if we shift left to software development, we enable cars to be software defined, and we enable reuse of software across multiple hardware deployments. That's when scale happens. That's when we're really able to scale this kind of technology. And so that's our position in the industry, and that's why we've invested in what is SOAFEE. SOAFEE is an open standard, and we have the likes of AWS, Carriad, Red Hat, SUSE, all involved in the governing of SOAFEE. We've opened it up into the industry because it has to be. It's just not one of us, right? We have to come together across the industry to enable something like that.
Yeah, and I think I think it's just fantastic that you're championing that as a business, right? I think if you look at IoT or any standard really in technology, it's really, really important to have a standard, to have a benchmark, to be able to know where you are against something else, but also the software reuse and to get it out to scale. So if you look at Matter, for instance, or some of the work that Katina X are doing, right? And the enablement of SOAFEE sounds like we're on the right track, and you've got some really good partners in there. And as a sort of governing body, what's the aims behind SOAFEE then, and where is it likely to go in the future?
Well, like I mentioned, we have three different pillars that we're focused on, right? Mm-hmm. One is just the technologies that we've been able to use in the cloud. We now can deploy those kind of technologies like hypervisors, technologies of the real-time nature of software deployment. We have the standard base such that we have now cloud-native assets that we can deploy into the cloud, into the edge, while keeping in mind the safety and the real-time nature of the car, right? So that is the software-defined and the synergy between what's in the edge and what's in the cloud. Then it's the software reuse. So multiple hardware technologies. Right now, it's amazing if you think about it. Every new hardware deployment, whether you get it from one silicon vendor or another, you have to do a brand new software deployment. How's that going to happen when you have that many vehicles and that many different technologies available, and the vast amount of software that has to be deployed for each one of these vehicles? If you had to do it bespoke for every single car, every single model, can you imagine that there's no way to scale? The problem becomes exponential. So it's software reuse. And then it's starting software early. So being able to simulate the car enough so that you can start your software design and deployment early. And so those are the three premises of what we created SOAFEE around. But even, and as we get into SOAFEE, what we've been really focused on this year is seeing some deployments with that SOAFEE standards. So we have lots of different players that are already investing in platforms or have demos or having being able to demonstrate that technology. But what we're really focused on now is to see it on the road, and that's going to be our number one focus.
Yeah, I can imagine, because you need the real data, don't you, right? Mm-hmm. In order to then collect it, harness it across everyone else that's involved. Right. From a safety first perspective, one would imagine.
Exactly.
Being able to understand various elements and make the right decisions. And is that what we can expect for SOAFEE in the future? And is this
what you can expect? Yeah, what you can expect from SOAFEE in the future is that you're going to see in SOAFEE you have OEMs, we have tier ones, we have silicon vendors, we have software vendors. It's over 80 participants in SOAFEE. And what's beautiful about it is that all are participating in the software development of and the creation of SOAFEE. So what you're going to see in the near term is these vendors all leaning in, all of these players leaning in, AWS leaning in, and Carriot and others, and start to see that develop into real code that can be reused in a vehicle, right? So we're starting to see everyone participate in contributions. That's what's happening now. And then what we're going to see in the near future is how we can see it demonstrated in a vehicle in production, and then see that software-defined capability being reused in the cloud and in the edge. And so I think this stuff across industry, it's easy when you go alone. You go further when you go together, but it takes a bit longer, right? As we see it all come together this next year or two.
Yeah, and I think, if history teaches us anything, it's this collaborative, open source nature gets us to that end result actually quite quickly. And I think when it comes to things like automobiles and the automotive industry, it's really, really important. We can't gloss over the fact that the safety of this and the coalition of various electrification and autonomous driving, etc., it's critical that we learn from this and get the real world data, as you mentioned, and actually deploying SOAFEE out there so that we can learn, understand, and make the necessary changements. So I completely agree with you. So just on to my next point then. So, what sort of lessons have already been learned so far in this process, Dipti, from implementation of software-defined vehicles?
Well, it's interesting because we started with software-defined vehicles and it's been around for quite some time. But what we're starting to see with the onset of electrification, autonomous functionality, and software-defined vehicles, I talked about that perfect storm element of things.
Yes,
is that we're starting to look at the vehicle differently. In that, can we create centralized compute and zonal controllers, right? So some level of merger of the IVI and the ADAS unit coming together. So most often the IVI was one unit and the ADAS is another unit. And within the vehicle, we're starting to see the merger of those because it's easier to deploy software because that functionality is kind of blurry between the two, right? And so what does that create as an opportunity for mixed criticality? It's an opportunity to take some of the assets that ARM has when it comes to our safety and security technology that's embedded in our architecture. We have the ability to do mixed criticality. We have confidential compute. All of those features that we've been thinking about for the last 10 years and deployed in our V9 architecture are now starting to see the light of day as the merger of this architecture happens in the car, IVI and ADAS.
Thanks again for IoT Tech Expo Europe for sponsoring today's episode. IoT Tech Expo Europe brings together Europe's brightest minds to talk about cutting-edge technologies in one place. Experience top-level discussions, innovative IoT innovations and strategies. Mark your calendars for the 26th and 27th of September 2023 when IoT Tech Expo Europe returns to the vibrant city of Amsterdam. I'll be there, will you? Get your tickets at iottechexpo.com/Europe. The link will be in the description.
And then the other element of we're seeing is across the vehicle, we're starting to see zonal controllers. And these zonal controllers are also software defined. And so that way you have the ability to deploy software all the way down to, heated seats, or whether it be your power lock or things of that sort. So it's pretty amazing, the merger of what is software and then the actual change and how hardware is done in the car.
Yeah, I mean, it is mind-boggling how quickly this has all happened as well, right?
Like the electrification of a car, the powertrain, that hasn't been touched in over 20 years, right? It just worked. Why do we need to mess with it? And now we're starting to redefine that. It's pretty amazing how quickly that's happening.
Yeah, and I think public interest in this is quite high as well now, isn't it? There's various tax breaks and incentives for people to get more involved in electrified vehicles, and of course we're all trying to work towards a particular turn-off date. So I think, it's definitely the perfect storm, as you've mentioned a couple of times today.
Yeah.
And really, really interesting. What does it look like in the future then in terms of software-defined vehicles? How would you envision it impacting the automotive industry in a kind of broader sense?
I think we're going to continue to see ADAS functionality improve. So the safety elements of a car, we talked a while back about a fully autonomous car. Let's put that aside for just a moment. But what you'll start to see is just more and more of that safety being deployed in the car, and we'll get more and more comfortable with it because we have the ability to update it as we learn, right? And so more ADAS functionality in a car because we have the ability to learn faster and we have the ability to deploy software faster. I think you'll see as more ADAS functionality gets deployed in the car, you'll see the user experience of a car start to change. More entertainment in the car, more ability to have some independence, right? Then there's this panacea of solutions where the software-defined nature of the car and the software-defined nature of the city, smart cities, you start to see that come together where you have an awareness of the city around you, the red lights around you, the street lights, the cameras, the traffic monitoring that can happen within the infrastructure, then also being used in the car. Now, we have the technology to do that. It's a collaboration that's necessary to bring all that together. But that is when we really start to take advantage of the software-defined nature of the infrastructure and the software-defined nature of the car is when we can bring that together.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of ARM's involvement, Automotive is going to continue to play a major part of ARM's business unit moving forward in terms of the growth and various.
Absolutely. It gets even better for us in such that we continue to push the limits of how much performance you can get within a power window. Power efficiency has always been our forte, right? That is our value. And the ability to get more and more performance within a certain power budget is our secret sauce. And that's what we used in the mobile phone. It's also being used in the car because you can't have these power hungry data centers sitting in a car. How are you going to power that? How are you going to go the distance with that, right? And so we'll continue to invest in that. But more so, we're going to continue to invest in pulling all of these solutions together because it's no longer about just about the CPU. It's about the CPU, the graphics unit, the camera unit, the ML, the AI, and all of those technologies coming together. It's a heterogeneous compute unit. And so we're looking at this problem more holistically, not just being power efficient in the CPU, which we know how to do very well, but we also have a safety GPU, a safety ISP, and looking at the ML and the AI problem and how we integrate that into the GPU and the CPU. And so we'll continue to look at this problem more holistically and then bring it all together with SOAFEE in such that you can deploy this at scale.
Mm. And I think that's the critical part, isn't it? Deploying it at scale. Because if you didn't have that, it's all very kind of esoteric, isn't it? It's all quite difficult. You'd have to start from scratch each and every time someone wanted to try and do something.
That, and you and I have both been on the streets and seen those test vehicles running around, right? When are we going to get out of those test vehicles and actually see something in production, right? That would be cool to see. And that's what it's going to take. It's going to take this power efficient solution and the ability to have mature software to be able to do that and time under tension, right? And the amount of data collected in these vehicles that are running around is going to help us be able to deploy this thing.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point that you've just mentioned, the amount of data, because it really is colossal. If you look at the cameras, LiDAR systems, ADAS systems, everything that's within a vehicle now, it's huge, isn't it? So, that in itself is probably quite challenged to actually interpret that data and make good use of it, because the amount of vehicles on the road.
Well, and what's so beautiful is we're having the same conversations in automotive that this is an IoT podcast. We've had this conversation forever, which is what data do we need at the edge? What data sits in the data center? What needs to be private? What is open, right? All those conversations we've had in IoT for a while now. We're having those same conversations in the car.
Yeah.
Right? How much data do we need at the edge? How much data is in the cloud? Where does perception happen? Where does learning happen? Right? It's still a conversation up for debate because we're trying to figure out that. And that line's going to continue to change, just like it's changing in IoT. Right? It's going to change in the automotive as well.
And it, when you look at companies like Vertical Aerospace or Zoox or other people in the automotive field, this kind of problem of data and harvesting and understanding it magnifies multiple amounts when you look into actually the prospect of flying vehicles, right?
Yeah.
Because we're not.
I haven't gotten my head around that one yet, but yes, I get it.
We're not a million miles away.
I'm just trying to get the guy out on the road now, but but yes, flying vehicles, or I don't know, mind controlled vehicles. Well, let's go with it.
Yeah. Well, people are running tests, aren't they? We've had UAVs, delivery, etc. It can't, at the pace at which this is going, it can't be 30, 40, 50 years, right? It probably has to be sooner. Obviously, there's a safety, the trial aspect, so on and so forth for governments. But, I think everything comes back to SOAFEE, doesn't it, actually, about why that's really, really important to do it at scale, to learn from the data that's out there and being collaborative.
Well, and SOAFEE's used in industrial. So one of the things you mentioned is delivery, whether it be transportation, whether it be a factory, whether it's just moving inventory around in factory floors. All of those problems are a robotics problem, right? At the end of the day, is a robotics problem, and or a robotics question, and that's fundamentally what SOAFEE is looking to do. It is to create an environment such that you can deploy software safely and reuse software in a safe real-time environment at the edge.
Yes.
And most of us think of a car, but it's no different in a factory, which is moving heavy machine or things of that sort, right? And so we're seeing it more pervasively across the industry.
The embedded engineer of me from years ago is screaming out the cost saving and time saving benefits of code reuse as well, right? Without having to do it from scratch and refactoring big chunks of code. So I think that's really, really critical for this. It's not only time collaborative, but it's cost, right? So it's all those aspects.
I often say software defined vehicles is survival for the OEMs, and I fundamentally believe it. The exponential problem of software deployment and unique software for every single vehicle, or not being able to update that software, it is not solvable unless you have a software defined vehicle. They have to. There isn't a choice. This isn't a choice anymore. This is a survival element of the only way we can reliably deploy software is to have a vehicle that's software defined in the future, because of the vast amount of software that's required.
What a way to come and wrap up the podcast today. Absolutely.
Are we ready to wrap up already? We can keep going.
we
just got started.
we could go on for hours. We really could. I know. But I don't. We haven't finished just yet. I've got some more questions for you. But
okay.
We got the wrap up questions.
Okay.
But honestly, your passion, knowledge, and the way that you articulate this is really impressive, right? So I really appreciate your time. Dipti, as we come to the end of the podcast, or near the end of the podcast, not quite there yet, we always ask guests questions about predictions for IoT in 2023. Things that they would either personally love to see actually come into fruition, or perhaps what they're hearing at the moment that's going to come in by the end of the year. Do you have anything specifically to IoT, either with an automotive slant or not, that you would love to happen in 2023?
Industry and government collaboration. That's what it's going to take to truly deploy IoT, and we've had it, but I would like to see in 2023 us to make a significant progress and deploying some standards deploying easy ways for us to scale in IoT, because we still have a scale problem. We still have a scale problem in IoT. We've been trying to solve it for a long time, but it's going to take the industry coming together to truly solve that scale problem.
I couldn't agree anymore.
Yeah.
It comes up in 50%, if not more, the podcasts that we do, and it's the reason why IoT. It's the reason why we're still talking about it, and it's not actually just doing its thing. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what we've seen quite often is we call it walled gardens, right? It's a deployment, but it's really not at scale because it's really done bespoke. And what we need to see is that to open up, start to open up, so that all participants can be involved in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a question from one of our viewers. So we always ask our viewers in advance if they would like to submit any questions for guests, and this is one we have for you, Dipti. And I'll read it verbatim. What role can software-defined vehicles play in advancing the concept of smart cities? And how can they help cities become more sustainable, connected, and efficient?
Well, of course, there's one of the things I talked about as the next thing for software-defined vehicles is this collaboration with smart cities, right? The ability to know through cameras and streetlights where traffic is, or be able to predict where deadlock is, or be able to predict to make things safer. If we know that this area isn't safe or something else is going on. It's just this information sharing, data sharing between the city and the car is critical to bringing smart cities to light. And I think that's another area where we'll start to see collaboration here in 2023, and hopefully that continues into the future.
Yeah, it's that cross-pollination, isn't it, of devices, data sharing, standards, as you mentioned, and
exactly.
absolutely on the money. Completely agree with you. A couple of quick fire questions, if I can.
Okay.
A quote you live by.
A quote I live by. If you believe the world is good or you believe the world is evil, you're right. I like to choose the world is good.
It's good. That's quite striking, that actually, isn't it? It's got me thinking about it. You know, I wonder which way it is. I hope it's the first one.
Yeah.
If you could learn a new skill, any skill, what would it be and why?
I want to learn how to fly. I want to learn how to fly a plane.
Okay.
It's one of those things I've been trying to make enough time to go do is get my pilot's license. I want to get out of cars and get into a plane. I don't know.
Nice.
It's the next thing I'm going to do.
Do you know what? I can relate to that because I'm not the keenest flyer in the world. And I said to myself, one day I'll learn to fly, right? Because if I can learn to fly, then perhaps I'll be more comfortable with flying regularly, right?
Yeah.
So
I fly quite a bit. I don't. I fall asleep as soon as I get on the plane, so I don't.
You're one of those.
I'm one of those. It's survival.
It was going really well as well on the podcast, you know. And now I'm just jealous that you can do that.
Yeah. No. I'm actually scared of flying a plane. So I tend to take on something that scares the bejeebas out of me. I have no sense of navigation, so it'll challenge all aspects.
Do you know what? You've got to face your fears, though, right? Because it's the only way that you can grow. You know, when I started this podcast as well, I was always at the start. I was like, oh wow, like you're on camera now. You know, whereas if you just have a normal conversation with someone, like it's fine. But then you put a camera in front of someone's face, and all of a sudden it's like, you know,
it's scary. I think I said that right before this podcast. Every time I get myself on camera, I'm scared to death.
You couldn't tell, so you know, you put a really good brave face on. So good on you.
That's what it is, because I don't like the camera any more than anyone else.
I can imagine. My final question: if you could have a conversation with any renowned inventor or innovator, living or past, who would that be and why?
I'm going to give a typical answer, and I feel like I almost don't want to give it because it seems like it's obvious, but or one everybody would give. But it is Steve Jobs, and it. I find that the perfection in which he operated while still innovating, right? It's very hard to find that perfect balance, or even a balance. When you're innovating something new, when you're doing something brand new, it's rare that you can do it perfect at the same time as you're doing it new, right? It's kind of like just get it to work usually. But if you think about some of the first technologies that were deployed, the beauty in which it was deployed and how perfect it was, that intercept between beauty, perfection, and new. I've never seen that happen the way that he was able to pull that together. So I find that very interesting. Very interesting.
Dipti, it's been absolutely fantastic having you on the show. I genuinely mean that. You speak with such confidence and charm about the industry. It's been a real pleasure. You're very welcome. Where can people find out more about you and ARM and SOAFEE, etc.? Perhaps somewhere online.
Yeah, there's a vast amount of information. SOAFEE, you can look that up in Google search, or you'll find a bunch of information around it, and arm.com, and all the information's out there.
Excellent. Dipti, thank you for coming on the IoT podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you once again to IoT Tech Expo Europe for sponsoring today's episode. Once again, please get your tickets. The link will be in the description.
Thanks for tuning in to the IoT podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on whatever platform you're on. See you next week for more IoT talks and tales.